In the quiet town of Winchester, Virginia, there was a police dog that everyone knew by name Shadow. A sleek, sharp-eyed Belgian Malinois with a golden-brown coat and a black snout. Shadow was no ordinary canine. She wasn't just an officer's partner. She was a symbol of bravery, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. People often said she was smarter than most humans, and it wasn't far from the truth. Her instincts were razor-sharp, and her sense of smell could detect substances or people others couldn't find in days. Her handler, Officer Rachel Monroe, had been with the Winchester Police Department for 7 years, and she'd been partnered with Shadow for 5 of those. From the moment they met, Rachel and Shadow clicked. They trained together daily, slept only feet apart during long missions, and worked in perfect sync during operations. Rachel often joked that Shadow could read her mind, and in the field, it certainly felt that way. Together, they had completed over 200 successful missions. From sniffing out narcotics and highway busts to tracking down missing children, Shadow had built a reputation as a hero. The town adored her. At every public event, children would gather around her, some with wide eyes, others cautiously petting her muscular back. Shadow, ever gentle with civilians, would sit quietly and let them stroke her fur. Yet the moment her vest went on, she transformed into a laser-focused professional, her nose twitching, eyes scanning. She was more than a dog, she was a guardian. That particular July morning had started like any other. The summer sun was already bright at 8 a.m., and Rachel sipped coffee while rubbing sleep from her eyes. She and Shadow had just returned from a long overnight operation in the neighboring county. It had been a high-stress drug bust involving multiple suspects and a chaotic, hours-long standoff. Shadow had performed brilliantly, sniffing out a stash of heroin hidden behind a false wall. The suspects were in custody, and Rachel was proud but exhausted. She parked the cruiser in the rear lot of the station, shaded only by the neighboring courthouse. Shadow sat in the back seat, her tongue lolling out, still panting from the drive. The air conditioning had been running during the ride, but as Rachel turned off the ignition and stepped out, the air grew thick and heavy with heat. She reached for Shadow's leash but paused when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her captain. Urgent debrief in 5 minutes. Bring the report. Rachel hesitated for a moment. Normally, Shadow would be taken inside, given water, and placed in the K9 kennel room where it was cool. But the meeting was supposed to be quick. 5-10 minutes at most. She glanced back at Shadow through the tinted glass. The dog was lying down, relaxed, watching Rachel with calm eyes. Rachel made a decision she'd later regret every day of her life. "I'll be right back, girl," she said, tapping the window. Softly. Shadow perked her ears up but didn't move. Rachel locked the doors and jogged toward the station entrance, report folder in hand. Inside, however, things weren't moving quickly. The debrief turned into a full-blown strategy session. More officers arrived. The chief walked in. Discussions began about logistics, upcoming threats, political pressure from state law enforcement. What was supposed to be a 10-minute update turned into nearly an hour. Rachel, caught up in the conversation and pressured to contribute, didn't once think to glance at the clock. Outside, the temperature was rising rapidly. The bright sun beat down on the cruiser, its dark surface absorbing the heat. Inside, Shadow began to feel it. At first, it was just uncomfortable. The air was thick. She panted harder. Her body heated up fast. Dogs don't sweat the way humans do. They release heat through their tongues and paws, but in an enclosed, sealed vehicle, it's not nearly enough. She stood, turned in circles, then laid down again, confused. Something was wrong. She nudged the window with her nose, then tried. Pawing at the door, her claws made light tapping sounds. But there were no people nearby. The parking lot was nearly empty, and no one heard her tiny sounds from inside the sealed car. Still, Shadow didn't panic. She was a trained police dog. Barking without cause was discouraged. Discipline was drilled into her, so she waited. Her breathing quickened. Her body shook slightly. She didn't understand what was happening, but her instincts told her, survive. Back inside the station, Rachel was now in her second meeting. The first had led into a follow-up with the crime division. Her phone vibrated again. It was a message from dispatch. "Hey, your K9 coming in today for meds check?" Rachel froze. The words hit her like a truck. The room faded away. She felt her stomach drop. In a blur, she jumped up, muttered something about an emergency, and bolted out the door. Her boots hit the pavement hard as she sprinted across the hot lot, her eyes locked on the cruiser. The windows were steamed. One look told her the truth. She dropped the keys trying to unlock the door. "Shadow!" She screamed, fumbling. She saw movement barely. A limp body near the back door. Frantic now, she yelled for help. Officers ran over. One shattered the window with a baton. The door flung open. The heat hit them like a wall. Rachel reached in and pulled Shadow out. The dog was motionless, her tongue lolling, eyes half closed. She wasn't breathing right. "Call the vet. Call them now." Rachel screamed, already running toward her personal car with Shadow in her arms. There was no time to think, no time to blame. Only a sliver of time to save her best friend. The drive to the emergency clinic felt endless. Rachel gripped the steering wheel with one hand while the other cradled Shadow's limp body across the passenger seat. Her uniform stuck to her skin, soaked with sweat and panic. The air conditioner blasted cool air, but it was too late for comfort. Her eyes flicked between the road and Shadow's body, searching for movement, for breath, for anything. "Hold on, girl," she whispered over and over, voice cracking. "Please hold on." Shadow let out a faint, raspy sound. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't even a whimper. It was more like a weak gasp. A tremble ran through her chest, then stilled. Rachel's foot pressed the gas harder. Her mind raced with guilt, fear, and disbelief. How could she have forgotten Shadow? How could she leave her in that heat? The question screamed in her head, louder than the sirens she'd turned on as she sped through red lights. The veterinary trauma center sat 2 miles from the station, but it may as well have been 50. Every second stretched. Every stop sign, every car on the road felt like a delay Shadow couldn't afford. Rachel didn't care if she got suspended for reckless driving. All that mattered was getting Shadow help before it was too late. Finally, the clinic appeared. Rachel screeched into the parking lot, barely stopping the car before yanking open the door. 2 vet techs ran out, alerted by her call seconds earlier. Together, they carried Shadow into the EI room, her head lolling to the side. The heat still radiated from her fur. Her body was boiling, temps at 109.4, one vet said sharply. "She's crashing," said another. "We need cold packs. IV, now move." Rachel stood frozen at the edge of the room, heart pounding, unable to speak. She watched as 3 staff members moved around Shadow like a storm. They shaved parts of her fur, inserted IVs, wrapped her body in towels soaked in ice water. One nurse used a handheld fan, while another monitored her heart rate on the screen. The numbers didn't look good. "She's severely dehydrated," the lead vet said without looking up. "Her organs are likely under major stress. We'll do everything we can." That phrase, "everything we can," hit Rachel like a punch. She backed into the hallway, collapsed into a seat, and stared at the wall. The waiting room was empty, sterile, too quiet. All she could hear was her own breathing and the faint beeping from the machines inside. Time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. She didn't know. She didn't care. Her thoughts spiraled. She replayed every second of the morning, the moment she locked the cruiser, the way Shadow looked at her, that soft thump of her tail on the seat when she said, "I'll be right back." Rachel had faced armed suspects. She'd been in shootouts. But nothing had ever shaken her like this. This wasn't an enemy's bullet or a freak accident. This was her own failure. Her mind went dark with what-ifs. What if Shadow died? What if Yvette came out with that look, the one that meant she didn't make it? The door opened. Yvette stepped into the hallway, face serious but calm. Rachel stood up instantly. "She's stable for now," he said. "We cooled her down to 104. Still too high, but better. She's getting fluids. The next 12 hours are critical." Rachel's legs nearly gave out. "Can I see her?" she asked, voice hoarse. The vet nodded. "Only for a moment. She's unconscious, but hearing your voice might help." Inside the room, Shadow lay still, her chest rising and falling slowly. Machines surrounded her, tubes connected to every limb. Her fur was damp, patches shaved, her ears twitching slightly with each beep. Rachel walked closer, her footsteps quiet as if not to disturb her. She leaned down and whispered, "Hey, baby. It's me. You're okay now. I'm right here. I'm not leaving again." She stayed there until the nurse gently asked her to step back out. Outside the clinic, the news had already begun to spread. One of the officers who'd helped break the car window had posted an emotional status on Facebook about Shadow's condition. It quickly went viral. Within hours, dozens of people from the community were commenting, sharing, and asking for updates. Some were kind, offering prayers, hoping for recovery. Others were furious. How does a trained officer forget her own canine? She should be fired. That's neglect. No excuse. None. Rachel didn't disagree. She felt all of it, tenfold. But in this moment, she didn't care about reputation. Only Shadow mattered. By nightfall, candles had begun to appear outside the clinic. A small vigil formed: kids, parents, off-duty officers. Someone left a drawing of a brown dog wearing a gold badge. It said, "We love you, Shadow. Please get better." Inside, the vet worked through the night. Shadow was still unresponsive, her breathing shallow, but she was fighting. Her temperature dropped another degree. Her blood pressure stabilized. A faint hope bloomed, but it was too early to say anything with certainty. Rachel never left the waiting room. She refused food. She didn't answer texts or calls. She stared at the floor, hugging Shadow's training vest to her chest. Every so often, a nurse would check in with an update. Still stable. Still unconscious. No change. The guilt gnawed at her like a slow fire. This wasn't just a dog. Shadow was family. She was a partner who had saved Rachel's life more than once. In one operation the year before, a suspect had drawn a gun on Rachel during a warehouse bust. Shadow had lunged between them, tackling the man before he could fire. She'd taken a blow to the ribs and still didn't back down. Shadow had always been brave. Now, she was fighting again, this time against something invisible and cruel. Hours dragged on. Around 2 a.m., Rachel finally closed her eyes in the corner chair. Just as sleep crept in, a nurse woke her. "She moved," the nurse whispered. "It's small," but she moved her paw. Rachel jumped up, heart racing. She followed the nurse to the observation room. Shadow was still on her side, but her leg twitched, her nose flared. Then, her tail barely visible, gave a faint wag. The vet smiled gently. "She knows you're here." Rachel leaned down again, tears in her eyes. "That's my girl. You're still with me." Shadow didn't open her eyes, but somehow, in that moment, Rachel knew she wasn't giving up. Not tonight. Not ever. The next morning arrived slowly, casting a soft golden light through the clinic's windows. Inside, the world still felt frozen. Rachel hadn't gone home. She sat in the corner of Shadow's room, her head resting against the white wall, arms crossed over her chest. She'd barely slept 20 minutes here. 5 there, startled awake every time a monitor beeped, but she didn't complain. She couldn't. Not while Shadow still fought for every breath. The vet had said the night before, "It's not over. The heat damage may have reached her kidneys. The next 2 days will decide everything." Those words haunted Rachel's shadows. Eyes hadn't opened. Her paw had moved. Her tail had twitched, but she remained unconscious. The machines were keeping her alive, while her body tried to recover. Rachel couldn't stop staring at her chest, watching it rise and fall. Each breath was hope. Each twitch, a miracle. She felt helpless, and yet she remembered. Shadow had never been helpless. During a rescue 2 years ago, a tornado had ripped through a nearby trailer park. Shadow had dug through collapsed walls and jagged metal to find a missing boy buried under debris. She'd cut her paw pads and bruised her ribs, but refused to stop until the boy was pulled out alive. She didn't stop then. She wouldn't stop now. The vet came in mid-morning, clipboard in hand. "She's holding steady? That's good." Still unconscious, but her vitals are improving. Rachel nodded. "When will she wake up?" "It's hard to say," he replied. "We need her body to cool completely. Her kidneys are starting to respond to the fluids. That's a sign her system's still fighting. But if she doesn't regain full consciousness in 48 hours..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rachel returned to her seat and pulled Shadow's vest into her lap. It still smelled like her grass, sweat, a faint trace of leather polish. She remembered every mission they'd gone on together, every command Shadow followed, every moment they shared inside the cruiser. Now the same cruiser was a crime scene. Her own mind tortured her. Why hadn't she left the engine running? Why? Hadn't she double-checked the back seat? Why had she let work distract her from the one soul who would have given her life to protect her? She tried to drown the guilt by talking to Shadow. "You know I'm stupid without you," she whispered. "You're the smart one. I just flash the badge. You do all the thinking." Her voice cracked. "I need you to come back. Just one more time." By afternoon, something changed. Shadow stirred. Her tail gave a clear, intentional wag. Her leg flexed. Then, slowly, her head shifted on the pillow. Rachel gasped, rushing to the bedside. Shadow's eyes fluttered slightly. Only one open clouded. And unfocused, but it was movement. It was more than hope. "She's waking up," Rachel shouted. The vet rushed in. A nurse followed. All three leaned over her as the monitor beeped faster. Shadow opened her eye wider. Her mouth moved slightly. She didn't make a sound, but her gaze turned toward Rachel. "Shadow," Rachel breathed. "It's me. I'm here." The dog blinked. Once slowly, like a fragile signal in the dark. The room was silent. Even the machines felt quieter, as if honoring the moment. "She recognizes you," the vet said softly. "That's a good sign." Rachel dropped to her knees beside the bed, tears flooding her face. She didn't wipe them away. She just kept whispering Shadow's name over and over like a prayer, her hand resting gently on the dog's shoulder. For the first time in over a day, it didn't feel like goodbye. Outside the clinic, the town had taken notice. The officer's Facebook post had exploded across the internet. News stations picked up the story. Headlines read, "Hero Canine fights for life after heat stroke incident. Police dog battles death after being left in hot cruiser. Community rallies around dying canine officer heartbroken. Animal rights groups got involved. Some offered donations. Others demanded accountability. Protests began forming at the police department, peaceful but firm. Signs read, "Justice for Canine South," and "No more neglect." Rachel was now caught between overwhelming grief and public scrutiny. She didn't check social media. She didn't read the headlines. But she felt the pressure everywhere. Some said she should be fired. Some called it abuse. Others blamed a broken system with no heat alarm sensors installed in canine vehicles. One local journalist reached out to the clinic, requesting an interview. Rachel refused. "I don't care what people say," she told the vet. "If she survives, they can drag me through the mud. I'll accept whatever comes." She meant it. That evening, Shadow drank water, got only a few drops, and she needed help. But the vet staff considered it a major victory. Her kidneys had begun filtering fluid again. Her breathing was more regular. Though she still couldn't stand, her tail wagged every time Rachel entered the room. "You're making headlines," a nurse told Rachel. "People are sending donations in her name, from other states." Rachel looked down at Shadow and whispered, "Look at you, superstar." Later that night, the vet sat beside Rachel in the waiting room. "Her chances are better now. I'd say 50-50. If she continues this progress by tomorrow, we can start physical assessments." Rachel smiled for the first time in 2 days. Then she asked the question she hadn't dared to ask until now. Will she ever be able to go back to duty? The vet hesitated. Too early to know. There's neurological risk from overheating, possible brain swelling, partial vision loss. If she pulls through, it might be a different life. Rachel nodded slowly. She doesn't need to be a working dog anymore. She's already done more than enough. The following morning brought another surprise. Shadow tried to stand. She failed. Her legs shook beneath her and gave out, but she tried. The vet called it reflexive motor response. Rachel called it determination. She encouraged her gently, helping support her chest as Shadow slowly pushed up, wobbling like a newborn foal. Every movement was agony. Every shift in her muscles made her groan softly. But she never stopped trying. "She's not giving up," the vet said with quiet awe. "She's got a fighting spirit." Rachel stroked her ear, heart swelling. She always has. Outside, the glass doors of the clinic, people gathered again. This time, they came with posters that read, "We love you, Shadow." A little girl brought a bouquet of plastic flowers shaped like bones. A retired officer drove 5 hours to drop off a dog blanket his late K9 once used. Shadow had become more than a pet, more than a police dog. She was a symbol of courage, of suffering, and now of hope. And though the road ahead was long, one thing was certain: Shadow had chosen to live. The clinic's walls had become Rachel's second home. For days now, she hadn't changed out of her uniform. The only things she allowed herself were coffee, brief naps in the waiting room, and updates from the vet about Shadow's condition. Each time Shadow moved or drank or wagged her tail, Rachel felt like she could finally breathe again. The horror of that day hadn't left her. It lingered like a shadow over every second. Shadow's recovery brought tiny cracks of light through the darkness. The townspeople continued to show up outside, their presence quiet but powerful. They stood respectfully, sometimes with candles, sometimes with cards, watching the door like family members waiting for news of a loved one. But inside the police department, the mood was different. Rachel's captain had called her earlier that day. "Rachel, we need you to come in. There's an internal review starting. You know we have to investigate what happened." She'd expected this. In fact, she welcomed it. So she left Shadow in the care of her most trusted nurse, whispered goodbye, and walked into the station she'd served for years now as someone under suspicion. Every step down the hallway was heavy. Officers avoided eye contact. Some nodded silently. Others didn't look up. She entered the conference room, where two department heads, an attorney, and a representative from the K-9 training unit sat waiting. "We're not making assumptions," her captain began, "but we need a full, detailed account. Everything from the moment you arrived at the station until the moment Shadow was found." Rachel sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't try to justify herself. She didn't offer excuses. She laid out the truth, every painful, humiliating second of it. How she had parked, locked the cruiser, walked away, and simply forgot. How she thought she'd let Shadow out, only to realize hours later what she'd done. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. "She trusted me to protect her, and I didn't." There was silence in the room. The attorney finally spoke. "Do you understand the consequences this could bring, Officer Monroe?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, sir, and I'll accept them. I'm not here to save my job. I'm here to own what I did." The K-9 unit rep, a grizzled man with 20 years of dog training behind him, looked at her and said, "That dog survived because of her spirit. But you left her. That can't be ignored." Rachel's throat tightened. "I know. Still," he added after a long pause, "I've seen people abandon dogs over much less. You've been here every day. If she makes it, it won't be because we saved her. It'll be because she knew you were there." Rachel didn't respond. She COULDN single quotes T. Later that night, something unexpected happened. Shadow stood. Not for long, just 10 seconds. But she stood. Her legs shook beneath her thin frame, and her breathing was shallow, but her paws stayed planted. Rachel gasped from across the room, tears springing to her eyes. The vet stepped in, stunned. "She shouldn't be on her feet yet," he muttered. "But if she wants to fight, we let her." Shadow took 2 shaky steps before collapsing gently onto the mat. Rachel ran to her side and whispered, "You are the strongest soul I've ever known." Word of her progress spread fast. By the next morning, news vans had parked near the clinic. Shadow's story had reached statewide headlines. It wasn't just about a K-9 anymore, it was about survival. About second chances. About what it meant to be responsible for another life. Still, the backlash continued online. Some voices were angry. She should never work with animals again. How do you forget your own dog? Criminal negligence. Rachel read a few comments, then stopped. She didn't need the world's judgment. She already had her own. But she knew something else now. She would spend every day forward making it right. Shadow's body healed slowly. But her spirit didn't waver. By the end of the week, she could walk from her mat to the door of the recovery room. The clinic staff began calling her Sergeant Shadow. They made a paper badge and taped it above her bed. She started eating again, small meals, fed carefully by hand. Her vision remained blurry, and one ear drooped slightly, but Rachel didn't care. She was alive. One evening, as Rachel sat beside her feeding ice chips, a small group of children was allowed inside. They were the same kids who had made posters and sent drawings. The clinic made an exception. They said Shadow needed the love. One little boy with messy hair approached quietly, holding a sketch of Shadow in a superhero cape. He knelt and said, "You're the bravest dog in the world." Shadow licked his hand. The boy smiled so wide it brought Rachel to tears again. The town's response reached another level when the mayor visited the clinic to award Shadow a special commendation for outstanding courage and service. "I've never seen a community this united," he said during a press conference. "And it's all because of this incredible animal and her unbreakable bond with her handler." Reporters asked Rachel how she was handling the guilt. "For the first time publicly," she answered, "I made a mistake that nearly cost my partner her life. I won't hide from that." But Shadow forgave me. And from this moment forward, I'll spend the rest of my life honoring that forgiveness. She announced her plans to push for legislation that would require all K-9 units in the state to be equipped with automatic heat sensors and vehicle alarms. This can never happen again, she said. Not to any dog, not on our watch. Crowd clapped. Some cried, and through it all, Shadow sat beside her, slightly wobbly, wearing a new vest that read "Retired, but never forgotten." That night, after the crowd had gone and the cameras disappeared, Rachel sat quietly beside Shadow in the clinic room. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. Outside, a light rain began to fall. She reached down and ran her fingers gently behind Shadow's ear. "Thank you for fighting," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Shadow lifted her head, resting it in Rachel's lap. The moment was still, quiet, full of pain but full of grace too. And in that fragile silence, Rachel finally let herself believe they were going to be okay. Shadow's homecoming didn't come with a parade, but to Rachel, it felt like a miracle. It was the 9th day since the incident. After several more stable vitals, consistent appetite, and a near-full return of cognitive responses, the vet finally gave his reluctant approval to discharge Shadow, though with strict conditions. Constant monitoring, continued 4 fluids, kidney supplements, daily checkups, and no physical exertion. Rachel didn't care. She carried Shadow gently to her car, the cruiser, and placed her on a thick orthopedic bed in the back seat, rigged with a small fan and portable cooling pads. For the first time in over a week, Shadow was leaving the sterile white walls of the clinic behind. But Rachel was not the same woman who had walked into that station 9 days ago. Her body was tired, but her mind sharper than ever. The guilt still pressed on her like a boulder, but Shadow's wagging tail reminded her that every second from here on mattered. This wasn't a return to normal, it was a new life entirely. And Rachel intended to make it count. As they pulled into the driveway of Rachel's modest suburban home, neighbors emerged from their porches. Some clapped. Some just nodded quietly, respectful of the weight Rachel still carried. A few children waved small handmade flags with paw prints on them. Shadow, propped up just enough to see outside, blinked at the familiar street, her ears perked halfway. Rachel carried her inside with the care of a mother holding a newborn. She had cleared out her living room, placing soft bedding, fans, water bowls, and toys everywhere Shadow could reach. A special ramp was installed by the back door, so she wouldn't need to climb stairs. The entire house was rearranged for Shadow's comfort. The first night home was quiet. Shadow slept deeply, breathing steady. Rachel slept on the floor beside her, afraid to even close her eyes at first. Every small movement from the dog startled her awake, but with each passing hour, the weight on her chest eased. Not because she forgave herself, but because Shadow had. And if Shadow had chosen to keep living, Rachel couldn't keep drowning in shame. She needed to fight forward to. The next morning, Shadow ate her full meal, boiled chicken and rice with kidney supplements hidden inside, and managed to walk unassisted to the back door. Rachel helped her down the ramp, where she lay under the early morning sun, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the sound of birds. It was peaceful, but the outside world had not forgotten what happened. Media vans continued to call. Journalists showed up at the precinct trying to speak with Rachel, who had officially taken a leave of absence. Her police chief released a short statement confirming that internal review was still ongoing, but praised Rachel's extraordinary dedication during Shadow's recovery. Still, the public was divided. Some internet commenters accused her of abuse. Others called for forgiveness and awareness. National TV segments aired panels debating whether officers should be criminally charged in cases like this. Rachel ignored it all. She had one goal: help Shadow heal. On the fifth day home, Shadow tried to play. Rachel was folding laundry when she heard a soft thump from the hallway. Turning around, she found Shadow nudging her favorite toy, a squeaky stuffed squirrel, toward her with her nose. It was clumsy, slow, but unmistakably playful. Rachel dropped the towel and laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "You want to play, huh?" She smiled. "Okay, but easy." They sat on the floor together, passing the toy back and forth. Shadow's tail thumped steadily. Rachel held it together until Shadow gave a tiny bark, not loud, but firm. That was it. Rachel broke into tears, hugging the dog gently, overwhelmed by the simple sound of her voice. "She's coming back to me," she whispered, and she was. A week later, the clinic called. They had just completed full diagnostic tests. Shadow's blood work showed slight, but improving kidney function. Her vision in the right eye was permanently impaired, but there were no signs of brain swelling. Her weight was slowly returning, and most importantly, her emotional recovery was far ahead of what they expected. "She's beating the odds," the vet said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Rachel hung up the phone and looked over at Shadow, who was half asleep on the living room floor, snoring softly through her nose. She had placed her paw on the edge of Rachel's boot just enough to feel her nearby. Rachel smiled. "You're the one doing all the work, girl." That evening, Rachel began writing. Not a police report or journal, but something new. A plan. 2 days later, Rachel stood at the local city council meeting with Shadow beside her, resting on a custom-made support mat. She waited patiently as officials finished routine agenda items. Then her name was called. As she approached the podium, the room quieted. Reporters in the back readied their cameras. Rachel cleared her throat and said, "Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm not here as an officer today. I'm here as a partner, a friend, a person who made a devastating mistake and wants to make sure no one else has to live with it." She paused. Shadow survived because of her strength. But this never should have happened. Our department, like many across the country, uses cruisers without built-in heat alarms or automatic cooling systems. That must change. She presented her proposal, Shadow's Law, a statewide initiative to install mandatory heat alarms in all police K-9 vehicles. The system would alert dispatch if a dog is left inside beyond safe limits. Cooling fans would activate, and vehicle windows would automatically roll down in emergencies. "I failed Shadow once," she said. "I'll spend the rest of my life protecting others like her." There was silence for a moment. Then, applause. Not loud or dramatic, but respectful. The mayor nodded. "We'll review your proposal." And Officer Monroe, "Thank you." Rachel stepped back, but not before placing a gentle hand on Shadow's head. "She's the real hero," she said quietly. That night, the clinic sent Rachel a message. They were preparing a formal commendation for Shadow, not for her past service, but for her courage in surviving one of the deadliest situations a K-9 can face. They wanted to host a public ceremony. Rachel hesitated at first, unsure if Shadow could handle the noise or stress. But the next morning, Shadow surprised her again. She walked unaided down the hallway, tail high, steps confident. Rachel laughed softly. "Okay, ceremony it is." The next chapter was beginning, and this time, it was on Shadow's terms. The day of the ceremony arrived under a clear blue sky. It was held in the town's central park, beneath a large white canopy, surrounded by folding chairs and American flags. Rows of people gathered long before the event began. Residents, fellow officers, children with homemade signs, and news crews with their cameras poised and ready. The atmosphere was respectful, but full of anticipation. The center of it all sat a podium adorned with flowers and a large poster of Shadow. showing her in uniform, her vest gleaming, ears alert, and eyes sharp. But today, the Shadow who arrived was different. She wasn't in uniform anymore. Instead, Rachel had dressed her in a soft blue vest with a patch that read, "Retired, still brave." Shadow walked slowly beside her, tail wagging low, steps careful but steady. The moment the crowd saw her, an emotional hush fell over the gathering. It wasn't just admiration. They were witnessing a miracle. Rachel guided her to a cushion, laid in front of the podium, where Shadow laid down gracefully and rested her head on her paws. The mayor stepped up first. "We are gathered here today, not just to honor a police dog, but to honor resilience," he began. Shadow's courage, her loyalty, and her fight to survive have reminded us all of the deep emotional bond between human and animal. She didn't just come back from the brink. She carried a community with her. Applause followed, heartfelt. And Warm. A police commissioner spoke next, highlighting Shadow's achievements in law enforcement. Over 200 operations, 3 child rescues, 5 major drug busts, and numerous suspect apprehensions without injury. But he paused before continuing. And yet, her greatest accomplishment may be what she endured outside the line of duty. Rachel was the final speaker. She stood at the podium with Shadow at her side and a heart full of conflicted emotions. "I've stood in this uniform for many years," she began, "but I've never felt as humbled as I do today. I made a mistake, one that could have cost the life of someone who's never failed me, not once." She looked down at Shadow. "She forgave me before I forgave myself. That's what animals do. They don't hold grudges. They don't care about our titles, our flaws, or our worst days. They just love." Rachel went on to describe Shadow's law, her proposed policy initiative, and thanked the council members who had already begun drafting the first official legislation. The goal: to install heat sensors and emergency cooling systems in every K9 cruiser statewide. The mayor returned to the stage, holding a velvet box. "Shadow, by unanimous decision of our city council, and with the gratitude of this town, you are hereby awarded the Medal of Bravery and Service." As he pinned the medal to her vest, the crowd rose to their feet. Children cheered. Some of the officers saluted. A few people wept, and Shadow, blinking slowly, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, lifted her head and let out a soft, low bark. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here." The event was covered by national news that evening. A popular evening anchor began the segment with, "Tonight, we bring you the story of a dog who didn't just survive the unthinkable, she changed the law." Clips from the ceremony aired across the country. Shadow's face appeared on major news websites. Her story was shared millions of times on social media. Hashtags like #ShadowStrong and #ForTheK9S trended for 2 days. Animal rights groups applauded the movement. Pet lovers everywhere flooded Rachel's inbox with messages of support. Many shared their own painful stories of pets lost in accidents, of dogs who had saved lives, of officers who had made similar mistakes, but never had the chance to make it right. Rachel read every message. She cried through most of them. It became clear that Shadow had touched a nerve far deeper than a local tragedy. She had become a symbol not just of survival, but of how easily even the best of us can make fatal mistakes, and how healing is possible if we choose to take responsibility. But not everyone was ready to forgive. Several activist groups continued to call for Rachel's suspension. Petitions circled demanding stricter punishments for officers who left K9 South in vehicles, regardless of the outcome. A few legal analysts debated whether criminal charges should still be considered. Even though Shadow had survived, Rachel understood. She didn't argue. She'd accepted from the start that she might lose her badge. What mattered more was that Shadow's law was moving forward, and that Shadow was alive to see it. Still, the guilt resurfaced one evening as Rachel sat by the fireplace. Shadow curled beside her. "I keep waiting for someone to knock on the door and take everything away," Rachel said aloud, stroking the dog's head. Shadow shifted, placing her paw over Rachel's hand. It was a small gesture, but it grounded her completely. In the following weeks, Shadow began walking further each day. First across the living room, then out to the yard. Eventually, she made it all the way down the street with Rachel walking slowly beside her. Neighbors waved from porches. Kids ran out with treats. Local businesses placed "Thank you, Shadow" signs in their windows. Rachel took her to schools, where children asked questions and drew pictures of her. What does Shadow dream about? Is she scared of anything? Does she like peanut butter? Rachel always answered with a smile. She dreams of chasing bad guys and peanut butter. Everywhere they went, Shadow was more than a dog. She was a lesson. Then, one day, Rachel received a letter in the mail. It was stamped with the state governor's seal. Inside was a short note. Shadow's law has passed. Full statewide implementation begins next quarter. Thank you for fighting. Your story saved others. Rachel broke down. It was done. Shadow's suffering hadn't been in vain. Her pain had changed laws, saved future lives, and sparked a conversation across the country about how we treat working animals not as tools, but as partners. That night, Rachel and Shadow sat under the stars in their backyard. The world was quiet. The pain was still there, but it wasn't the whole story anymore. Rachel looked down at the dog who had nearly died because of her, and had lived because of her. "You're a hero, you know that?" she whispered. Shadow nuzzled closer, then rested her head on Rachel's lap and closed her eyes. She didn't need medals or applause. She just needed this. Peace, safety, love. And Rachel would spend the rest of her life making sure she had it. The breeze was cool that morning, a welcome relief after weeks of sweltering summer heat. Rachel clipped Shadow's vest gently around her chest. It was no longer the sharp, stiff black armor she once wore for duty. Now it was a soft navy blue, harness with golden letters, "Retired, Honor in Service." It had been a full 2 months since the day that changed everything. 2 months since the station's backlot had become a nightmare, since Shadow had faced death in a sweltering car, and Rachel had nearly lost her forever. Now, despite scars both visible and unseen, Shadow had recovered more than anyone expected. Today would be their final patrol. Not an official one. Not chasing suspects or searching abandoned buildings, but a quiet walk through the town where Shadow had served her entire life. It was Rachel's idea to give her partner the goodbye she deserved. The station had approved it. Officers who once questioned Rachel's judgment now stood beside her. Some carried Shadow's favorite toys. Others brought her treats. The police chief, a normally gruff man of few words, wiped at his eyes behind sunglasses as Rachel lifted Shadow gently into the back of the cruiser, this time with the engine running and the air conditioning blowing strong. "Ride safe, girl," he said softly. One last time. They started at the local elementary school. Children lined up along the fence, waving paw-print flags and holding hand-drawn signs. Shadow walked slowly, her legs older, her body stiffer, but her tail wagging with pride. Rachel held the leash loosely, letting her partner lead. One child, a boy with a stutter, stepped forward. "To thank you for being brave," he said. Shadow licked his hand gently, and the crowd cheered. Rachel smiled, blinking away tears. This wasn't just closure, it was healing. Next was the city square. People from all walks of life gathered there. Firefighters, nurses, veterans, and families clapped as Shadow made her way past the fountain where she'd once helped track a missing girl 3 years ago. One of the nurses held up her phone, showing the photo from that very rescue. Shadow, soaked and muddy, standing over the child protectively. That girl now, 11, was there too, holding a leash of her own. Her new puppy barked playfully at Shadow. "She saved me," the girl whispered to Rachel. "Now I want to be just like her." Rachel knelt down. "Then you're already halfway there." Their final stop was the precinct dot as the cruiser pulled up. Shadow's ears perked. She recognized the building, even after months away. Rachel opened the back door, and Shadow stepped out slowly. Her joints were weaker, but her spirit had never faltered. She walked up the steps under a banner that read, "Welcome home, Shadow." Inside, the squad room had been cleared. Her old canine crate, cleaned and polished, now held a blanket and flowers. Her nameplate, once hanging above her desk space, had been replaced with a plaque, "K9 Shadow, 7 years of service, countless lives protected." The entire department had gathered. Rachel guided her partner to the center of the room. A senior officer stepped forward with a wooden box. Inside was a folded American flag, a gold-plated tag engraved with her badge number, and a certificate of retirement. Then came the final radio call. Rachel picked up her unit radio, her hand trembling slightly. "K9 Shadow, this is Officer Rachel Monroe. End of watch. You served with honor, courage, and love. You're officially 10-7. The radio crackled with a long pause. Then dispatch responded. "Copy that. K9 Shadow is 10-7. We thank you for your service. You'll never be forgotten." The room stood silent. Not a dry eye in the place. Rachel knelt beside her dog, burying her face in Shadow's fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You made it home." Back at the house, Rachel removed Shadow's harness for the last time. She placed it gently in a glass case beside Shadow's Medal of Bravery, the folded flag, and her original training collar. It was a small memorial on a shelf, but to Rachel, it was sacred. Shadow, now stretched out comfortably on her soft bed, looked up with sleepy eyes. "No more alarms," Rachel said. "No more sirens. Just soft beds, slow mornings, and all the treats you can handle." Shadow wagged her tail once, as if in full agreement. The days grew slower after that. Calmer. Rachel and Shadow still went on short walks. They visited schools and veteran centers, where Shadow became a quiet symbol of strength. People didn't ask about the incident anymore. They knew the story. What they wanted now was just to be near the dog who had fought so hard to live. And through every moment, Shadow stayed by Rachel's side. Then came the evening Rachel had feared. Shadow had been more tired than usual that day. She hadn't eaten much. Her breathing was slower. Her eyes, always so alert, seemed far away. Rachel knew. The vet had warned her that organ damage could shorten Shadow's life, even with recovery. Some days would be perfect. Others would remind her just how fragile healing could be. She laid beside Shadow on the rug and whispered stories of their time together, of their first patrol, of the night Shadow chased down an armed suspect through an alley, of the time they found a missing girl in the woods during a storm, Shadow howling until help arrived. The house was quiet, except for the rhythm of her breathing and the occasional sigh from the old dog beside her. "Hey," Rachel whispered softly, "you don't have to fight anymore. If you're tired, it's okay." Shadow blinked slowly, pressed her head against Rachel's chest, and closed her eyes. That night, Rachel stayed awake beside her, counting every breath, each one a goodbye in slow motion, each one a gift, because after everything, Shadow was still hers, still loved, still home. The sun broke over the horizon in a wash of gold and soft rose, painting the sky with a calm that felt too quiet, too still. Inside her home, Rachel sat motionless on the rug beside Shadow's bed. Her hand rested gently on the old canine's chest, feeling the soft, still fur where a heartbeat used to be. Shadow had passed peacefully in the early hours. No noise, no struggle. Just one last breath after years of loyalty, courage, and love. Rachel didn't cry at first. She just sat there, frozen in the silence. The air felt different now. The room too big. The bed too empty. For years, Shadow had followed her from room to room, padding behind her like a shadow in the literal sense, silent, constant, and always watching. Now, there was just stillness. She gently covered Shadow with the blanket she'd loved, and whispered, "Good girl." News of Shadow's passing spread fast. Rachel hadn't planned to make a public announcement. She thought she would grieve privately. But her phone lit up with messages, her door filled with flowers, and her porch overwhelmed by cards from neighbors, officers, and strangers across the country. The town mayor issued a statement. "Today, we lost not just a dog but a piece of our community's heart." Flags were lowered to half-staff at the police station. The clinic that treated her left out a sign reading, "Rest easy, Sergeant Shadow. Your fight is over." Children at the elementary school held a moment of silence. A little girl tied a black ribbon to her own puppy's collar and whispered, "This is for Shadow." And Rachel, though devastated, understood something as she watched all this unfold. Shadow hadn't just been her partner. She belonged to everyone now. A week later, the town held a memorial. It wasn't grand or showy. Rachel wouldn't have allowed that. But it was dignified, under the same white canopy where she'd once received a medal. Shadow's urn sat atop a small platform. Around it were framed photos. Her first patrol, her retirement walk, her slow recovery from the accident. The most striking photo was one of Rachel and Shadow, forehead to forehead, taken the day after she'd returned home from the clinic. Rachel stepped up to speak, holding the same leash that had guided them through hundreds of shifts. The empty loop now hung gently at her side. "She was more than a canine," Rachel began, voice firm, but thick with emotion. "She was my partner, my family, and the best part of my life." She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Officers in uniform, children with painted signs, older veterans who had brought their service dogs. Shadow forgave me for something I couldn't forgive myself for. And in doing that, she taught me what grace really means. Rachel reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Shadow's service badge, now framed. I made a promise to her that her pain would change something. And because of her, canine units across the state are now equipped with heat alarms. Her suffering sparked protection. Her silence inspired reform. She turned to the urn, voice cracking just slightly. "You didn't leave the world quietly, girl. You roared all the way to the end." The audience stood and clapped, not thunderously, but reverently. It was not a goodbye. It was a thank you. Rachel spent the following weeks slowly returning to her life. She declined the department's offer to return to duty. Her days of riding in cruisers and chasing suspects were over. But she wasn't done serving. Instead, she began working with a nonprofit dedicated to canine safety, helping departments across the country implement Shadow's law. She traveled to training facilities, gave speeches at conferences, and consulted on better equipment standards. Everywhere she went, she carried Shadow's collar with her. Her body may be gone, she would say, but her mission didn't end. People listened. Departments took notice. And slowly, the world began to change. But home was still the hardest part. Each room echoed with memories. The door, where Shadow once sat waiting when Rachel came home. The back porch where she loved to lie. In the sun, the food bowl Rachel hadn't moved since the last meal. But in that grief, Rachel also found joy. She smiled, remembering the time Shadow chewed her new boots, but left her old ones untouched, as if suggesting, "These are more your style." Or when Shadow once refused to leave a child's side at a crash scene, despite all orders, sensing trauma only a dog could see. These weren't just memories. They were gifts. One day, months later, Rachel visited the clinic to drop off a donation. The receptionist handed her a small package. "This came for you last week," she said. "From a boy named Ethan. You saved his puppy once." Inside the box was a puppy-sized vest. Sewn into the inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Officer Rachel, when I grow up, I want to be a hero like Shadow. Thank you for saving her, because she saved a lot of people after. I hope this vest helps another pup be brave. Love, Ethan." Rachel clutched the vest to her chest. Shadow's story wasn't fading, it was multiplying. That night, Rachel walked through the quiet house and opened a drawer in the living room. Inside were adoption forms. She hadn't been ready until now. With a deep breath, she signed her name. 3 weeks later, a rescued German Shepherd puppy arrived from a canine training shelter. She was young, eager, and already a little wild. But when Rachel knelt to meet her eyes, something settled in her heart. "You've got big paws to follow," she whispered. The puppy barked once, tail wagging wildly. Rachel laughed. "You'll do just fine." A framed photo of Shadow remained on the mantel, alongside her urn, badge, and medals. Rachel still talked to her sometimes quietly, like a prayer. And on the first cool morning of fall, she took the puppy to Shadow's favorite trail. They stopped at the lookout point where Shadow once barked at passing clouds like they were threats to the town. Rachel sat down and looked at the sky. "Still watching over me, huh?" The wind picked up. The leaves danced. And in that quiet, sacred space, Rachel knew Shadow was still by her side. Always.